Here's a question that a realm that we could go in. Here's something that we could walk down a little bit. I mean, does it matter what the person's theological position is when they're writing something like a lexicon? And the reason I would say that is, I mean, you might have people like, well, Bart Ehrman, for instance. Dr. Ehrman is a renowned Greek scholar, even though he's not a believer, and he has fought viciously against Christianity and manuscript tradition and so on and so forth. But that might not mean that his lexicon would be off, right?
Well, that's true. That's true. That was a side note,
sure,
just to say
sure.
that. But I don't know the whole story about Joseph Thayer. So we're talking, 100 plus years ago. Pretty sure it's in the 19th century. So probably over 125 years ago. No Greek scholar takes it seriously today. I believe it's linked to BDB or not. What do they call it? Blue Letter Bible. BLB, Blue Letter Bible, because it's public domain.
Yeah, it's open source.
Right? Because it's like old scans, and so BLB or Blue Letter Bible is taking pains to excerpt all the entries and make them quick access to, hyperlinked to various Greek words and index, Strong's Concordance and stuff like that. And again, that reflects I don't know if it's not naivete on the part of the BLB producers, because I'm not, but it's just a little uninformed. It's like it's not refreshed with the times. But yeah, so to look to Thayer, regardless of whether he was, regardless of his faith commitment, to read Paradosis as Jewish tradition is clearly wrong.
This brings up a really
because we have.
Well, I was just going to say this brings up a really good point, because we've actually had a significant amount of expansion and good scholarship done on rabbinical and thought process on rabbinical sources within the scholarly community, even within the past 20 to 30 years, right? So, I mean, if you look back in the 70s and 80s, the use of rabbinical sources is drastically different within scholarly works, is drastically different than it is today. And the older you get, the more you see such reliance on rabbinical tradition. In fact, you start to see this shift a bit right when we come into the 90s and the 2000s. People start to realize, hey, the rabbinical tradition or the rabbinical literature doesn't actually go back to the first century. So we can't read something that was written 400 or 500 years later back into the first century. Now, of course, you can have people within the Jewish understanding, traditional Jewish understanding that's going to say, no, the oral tradition the Mishnah was extant in the first century. It just wasn't written down. And we, of course, push against this. But I think that as a whole, and I'm not trying to steal your thunder here, Rob, I'm just saying that as a whole, scholarship in general has shifted. You see like and there are good works that still rely heavily on Jewish literature. For instance, and I'll give you for instance, then I'll kick it back to you. But for instance, E.P. Sanders' Judaisms from 65 B. I'm going to get the dates wrong. It's like the work is referenced as Judaisms. The subtitle is like 65 BC to 70 AD or something like that. Anyway,
is that like Jewish law or something like that? Yeah.
So what he does is he just gives a history of what kind of, he tries to paint a very specific picture of what was going on in the first century around the Judaisms, and he does paint a picture of multiple Judaisms, how the temple service was being run, all these kind of things, and he uses multiple sources. This is done by E.P. Sanders, of course. So super juggernaut scholar, but what Sanders does in that work, and I use Judaisms quite a bit, to be completely honest. I use that work a lot because I think that he does a really good job of bringing together sources. But what he uses is things like Philo. He uses Josephus. He uses other first century literature or around the first century, and then he relies heavily on rabbinical texts. And so what I use this for is to see oftentimes how the Mishnah and the Talmud paint the picture of the first century, and then does it line up with other first century works. Anyway, all of this to say, when we look at something like E.P. Sanders' works, specifically Judaism's, he's going to rest heavily on the rabbinical literature. Once we get into the 2000s and later, and now into our specific year, scholarship is much more hesitant to reference the rabbinical literature unless they're saying the rabbinical literature here lines up with what we see in Josephus and Philo, and therefore there might be some validity to it. Thank you so much for watching this video. Tell us your thoughts on this subject by leaving a comment in the comment section. Make sure you like, share, subscribe, and enable those notifications, and we'll see you in the next video.